when it was right, it was magical. But it was like trying to hit that one spot, that target took a lot of figuring out. And then when you scale it up from 5 gallons to 2,000 gallons, that's another, massive change. And, I went from plastic buckets to wooden fermenters, and, it's just like, it was a lot.
Hello, and welcome back to another drinking episode of the TF Cast.
That was Willis Stout. And
yes, I'm Willis. We've already started.
That was Willis. I'm Grum coming at you from Black Frost Distilling in New Ulm, and the date is 4/5/23.
And I am your host, Jacob Bases. Today with us, we are so pleased to present Jace Marty, the co-founder of Black Frost Distilling, and hopefully we're going to have Sarah popping in and out, who also distills some of their product. Jace, if you could please just give us the first thing anyone should know about Black Frost Distilling and introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah, my name is Jace Marty. I'm one of the co-founders here at Black Frost Distilling, doer of all things. So we are a brand new distillery, I guess 6 months now, located in New Ulm, Minnesota. We are a whiskey-focused distillery primarily. Our whole concept is Northern Terroir, and I can talk about that a lot as we get into it. But like I said, our main focus is whiskey, so we've been laying down barrels since August of this year, and we are sitting right now inside of our full-service cocktail room, and so we are open to the public Thursday, Friday, Saturdays. We'll expand our hours as we get into some warmer summer months. That's where we're at.
First things first. When New Ulm, I think of a beer town. What is the whiskey market that you see emerging in this area?
Hopefully there's one. We kind of designed a whole business plan around that. But we have, bigger aspirations than just the city of New Ulm. But no, New Ulm has been a huge supporter of what we've been doing so far. Mm-hmm. And I come from the Shells family, so I obviously love beer more than everyone in New Ulm here. So no, it's beer and whiskey kind of go hand in hand. The process. The brewing process is the same as you start with it. It's just kind of where your end goals are they different. So we're trying to put it in a barrel, where in beer you're trying to put it in the glass. So that's to simplify it quite a bit. But
and you've got the whole operation in here, right? You take the raw inputs in your loading entrance there and process them through all the different steps that I'm sure we'll get into. And
absolutely. We are a start to finish grain to glass distillery. And even further than that, my business partner is the one that grows all of our grains. So
cool.
It's not quite an estate distillery in that, it's his family farm, but it is 10 miles from here. So that's basically all of our small grains that we use.
Yeah, that's awesome.
We grow right here in the local area.
Well, let's get immediate with kind of like what we got going on here right now, because we're sampling a couple of drinks. Why don't you just let us know what we got here, and we can talk a little bit about that and kick things off there.
Yeah, so I believe you have the daiquiri, and I know I only talked about whiskey, but we can get into why we're making rum and what's coming through the pipeline with that. But so classic daiquiri, made with equal parts of our 94 proof white rum and our overproof 114 rum, and then simple syrup and lime juice is a classic daiquiri.
Yeah, and I like anything with this overproof rum in it. I really kind of like a boozy cocktail. So you got me on board, but I think it would be really interesting to right off the bat hear why you did that, because that's something that I really kind of like about what's going on here is how I know a lot of places just bought whiskey and then they're selling it as their own when they started doing, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but I was very suspicious when I saw Minnesota distilleries, and it's like, well, this is aged 4 years, and we've only been able to do this for 2 years, it's longer than that now, but
sure.
If you could just explain that, because one of the things I really appreciate about y'all.
Yeah, and that touches on a bigger conversation that is kind of central to what we're trying to do here, and that there is a lot of smoke and mirrors in spirits in particular, in craft spirits, and that a lot of half-truths, made up stories about, Grandpapa's recipe, all that kind of stuff like that. And so we wanted to be very forthright in showcasing what we're doing here. So when you walk in, you'll see a giant wall of glass, and that looks into our production room. So with that, you'll see our copper still, where we do our distillation, our wooden open-top fermenters. That's where everything is fermented. So you see that we're actually making everything on site. Our cocktails in the cocktail room, a lot of it is source spirits, and it's the first thing it says on the menu is that, while our whiskey is aging, we're going to showcase other regional craft spirits. But I forget where I was going with that conversation.
Kind of the explicit explanation there is that whiskey has to be aged at least 2 years, right, before it can be considered ready to go.
Correct. Yep.
And so therefore, if there's that little window between when you start and when you could actually reasonably start serving your product.
With us being primarily whiskey focused, like you just said, we were laying it down. We do have one cocktail on the menu that you're having over there. It's the Jack Frost, which is made with our unaged rye distillate. It's kind of a unique take on a smoked old fashioned that's clear. And so that is a way to kind of get a sneak peek. And then Sarah just distilled some gin that we made to work on our doubler. And then we're going to have rum coming out pretty soon. So those will be our introductory spirits that you can have here at the cocktail room until our whiskey is ready to be released to the market.
Right. And there definitely is whiskey. I can confirm that I've seen a bunch of barrels. So they're on their way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not vaporware. There's real whiskey aging in barrels, and there's some in Grum's glass too.
Yeah, and I actually on that note, we've got one of these too. Mm-hmm. So what's this here?
Yeah, so because today we were mashing and distilling single malt, I thought it'd be appropriate to pull a barrel sample of single malt as well. So you have single malt that was filled in, I believe, the first week of November. So
okay.
Only a couple months old, but it's got some decent color on it already.
So it's on its way to becoming ready to bottle and
we're going to do everything a minimum of 2 years aging. That is a legal definition of straight whiskey at that point, and so that was a quality marker that we wanted to hit.
Okay.
And we're doing a lot of things that are unique in our production process that I think by the time we get to 2 years, our spirit will taste far mature, far beyond its actual 2-year age.
Okay.
And so right now this is clear solely because it hasn't been aged long enough? Is
Correct.
That what I'm understanding?
Yeah, that was distilled, Sarah?
It's
Tuesday?
super clear.
2 days ago.
It was distilled 2 days ago.
Yep.
I've never had clear whiskey before.
Yeah, so all of the color that you get in whiskey comes from the barrel itself. Well,
Or
should.
in
There's
many
other ways you
cases,
can do it
there's
that are not necessarily legal, at least in bourbon anyway. You can add artificial coloring, but we do not do any of that here. All of the color comes from the barrel itself. That is the sugars that are ingrained in the wood.
Where do you? First of all, Willis, you try that?
Yeah, we got to try it.
Yeah, we got to get that in. Where do you get your barrels from?
Yeah, so again, going back to our whole concept of northern terroir, all of the oak that is used to make the barrels and the barrels themselves are grown and made in Minnesota. So the primary cooperage that we use is Black Swan Cooperage. They're out of Park Rapids, Minnesota. It's all Minnesota grown oak, and then they make the barrels right there on site.
And we have a pretty unique part of our barrels that isn't necessarily what everyone else is aging their spirits in. Jace, would you like to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the reason why you have so much color at a spirit that's maybe 5 months old, 4 or 5 months old.
I wouldn't have guessed. I've had plenty of young whiskey, and I wouldn't have guessed this is under that 2-year mark.
Yeah,
That's
4
really
months.
It almost. There is a very, I don't know the wood, but you can really taste what's going on there.
Yeah, there's something going on.
So Black Swan Cooperage patented this, I don't know if it's a technique, I don't know, a thing, that they cut grooves inside the staves. And he looked at, in traditional barrel aging, if you take a barrel apart and you look at the side of a stave, it's called the red line, and it's how far the spirit penetrates into the wood. It makes a red line, and that's how far it is pushed inside of the wood, after so many years. And he looked at the depth of that and thought, it's really easy for liquids to go within the veins of wood, but it's hard for them to go against it. And so he cut grooves inside the staves and figured out to maintain the structural integrity of the barrel, but you're opening up the end grains down to that red layer. And so you get all of the extractable sugars of that barrel. And we use full-size 53-gallon barrels within 6 months. So you have all of the sweetness from that barrel almost immediately. And then your spirit is maturing while it's already gotten all the wood sugars in it. So it's instead of as the spirit is maturing and extracting sugars at the same time, you're putting all the sugars on the front end, and then it's maturing under a completely different environment in that it has all the sweetness in there as well. You extract a lot of the wood acids as well. Acids are a major driver of esterification and a lot of the maturation components that need to happen. So it's a very different maturation profile that we're getting from our barrels, and so that's why it does taste a lot more mature at a younger age. And there's things on the front end that we're doing as well, but that's the barrel itself is pretty special and unique in that.
Yeah, it almost sounds like you're describing how I imagine like a computer power sink. I mean, the heat sink, where you've increased the amount of surface area, so more of it's in contact and it works faster.
I'm not quite familiar with the analogy, but I think it's similar.
It's just more surface area.
Yeah, but we're not using smaller barrels, so that's another thing too with craft spirits is that you can use a smaller barrel and increase the surface area in relation to the amount of liquid in the barrel, and so you get a lot more wood flavor out of it at a younger age. We're using a full-size barrel, but it's by cutting those grooves, you're extracting all of it out of the barrel that would normally take 4, 5, 6 years in 6 months.
Oh, that's really cool.
And so you don't have any risk of really over oaking it because it's still the full size barrel. It's kind of the traditional maturation size, but it extracts it almost immediately.
Wow. Does it are the barrels reused then, or kind of after it goes through one of these processes and I hear you say like extracts the sugars?
Yeah.
Kind of like a one and done for a barrel like that?
Bourbon by law has to be aged in a new charred oak vessel. Container, I think, is the legal definition. So our bourbon will always be aged in new barrels, but like our single malt and our rye, right now we're only using new barrels, but we will, as we evolve and mature, we'll reuse our barrels. Definitely like for the rum, single malt as well. Single malt is very traditionally aged in second use or third use barrels. So yeah, we'll continue to reuse them. They're expensive, so it's in our financial interest to reuse them as well.
What does single malt mean? I don't even know what that means.
Yeah, so single malt means it comes from a single distillery and then it's made with malt.
Oh,
Single
okay.
and malt, yeah.
I see.
And so that is traditionally a Scottish, Scotland is known for Scottish single malt.
Okay.
There is a new, hopefully legal definition that is being created for American single malt. And I think, maybe the biggest difference is one that it's made in the U.S. versus Scotland. But Scotland has some very rigid rules of what you can and cannot do, and the American definition is maybe a little wider. And I think because as is traditional with American bourbon, you're using new barrels. Scotch is, I believe, has to be legally aged in a used barrel, where American single malt can be aged in a new barrel. So the sample that you have is aged in a new barrel, and as we go, we can either finish in different barrels or, age in secondary barrels as well. So, but for right now, everything we're producing is going into new barrels.
Cool.
So what's going to change about the flavor? Did I lose me?
No, it's your headphones.
Gosh. So what's going to change about the single malt that we got right there?
Yeah.
You mentioned that the color will probably get a little bit darker, but what could we expect from like the flavor profile?
Sure. Yeah, and I literally just pulled a sample. I didn't even taste it. So what did you guys think? What did you tell me what you tasted first? And
I like right on the nose. Like I got like a woody taste. If I had to guess, I would say like pine. I don't know. I've for as much as I like to drink expensive whiskey, I've never been able to point out characteristics. I just think good or bad.
It's definitely not aged in pine. That would I don't think you can do that, but.
I was honestly surprised how much flavor I got out of it, just period. Usually I'm not much of a whiskey drinker, and so it was weird how I could really taste some sweetness right away up top.
Mm-hmm. So early on, it is very young. It is, I mean, we're talking about a 4-month age whiskey here, where typically 4 years is kind of like when people start to release whiskey. So it is very young. So there is going to be a certain amount of, not harshness, but like where the spirit hasn't started to really blend with the wood itself. Even though we are with the crosscuts extracting a ton of wood sugar right away, it still needs time to come together. So there is sweetness. It'll become more integrated as it ages. The wood sugars will soften over time. We'll still get more. I mean, even the difference between that one and some of our first bills that we filled in August, it is significantly darker even in those couple months. So it's a very quick extraction that we're getting.
Yeah, I could see that wood flavor mellowing out quite a bit.
Yep. And so it's part of that initial, like, if you go in at 1 month where it's just like that's all those wood sugars are just getting thrown in there immediately. It's just like, it is not harsh, but it's bracing, we'll say.
Yeah.
And it takes time for it to soften up. And so I could have maybe pulled an earlier sample. We've been in business for 6 months, so it's not like I have a huge range of things to pull from. But,
It's really interesting. Like the smell, I really like the smell. Like I'm very attracted to the smell of this. And then when I taste it, I feel like I almost get two flavors. Like I get kind of this like nice, warm, sweet, woody, and then I get a little bit of this sharpness, that alcohol really kind of cutting in that hasn't fully been processed or absorbed. But yeah, it's really interesting kind of flavor profile. You can see kind of where it's going, Yeah,
I don't think I realized when I drink whiskey how much of the barrel I taste, because I really feel like I can taste like the actual ingredients still, rather than like like I said, I'm not really a whiskey drinker, so I've never really side by sided a bunch of them. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like there's a lot of the grain character yet from the initial raw spirit, and this is all part of that maturation process that's going to mellow out and meld together. And there's a certain amount of like esterification that still needs to happen. That's the acids that are from the barrel and then from what we've distilled itself.
Yeah.
Those are going to form esters. Those are fruit compounds, aromatic compounds. So we strive to really make an acidic wash. Wash is like what we feed through the still. And in the hopes that we will get a lot of those fruity, it should become more fruit forward as it ages.
Okay.
I used to think I was like a bourbon snob, and like I said, I've never been able to put forward a bunch of like the names of the tasting notes. But one thing that's really kind of bothered me about the way things have gone in the last few years is how a lot of times what I consider to be a more like complexity in higher end bourbons has been sacrificed for just smoothness. Like they'll just run it, like kind of pave it all over. And a real middle-priced one I'll give as an example of that is like Basil Hayden's. I think that one's really smooth to a fault, along with Jefferson's Ocean. It's like, well, I mean, I like adjacent bourbons to those, and I find those to be smooth to a point that I find to be like, oh, I would rather have something that was a little bit more spicy or like a high rye or something. So this type of thing appeals to me, and being able to taste the processes, I mean, it's definitely interesting.
Yeah. Kind of going back to like the big picture ideal. When my business partner Nate and I, this has been almost 9 years now in the making.
Oh, really?
Since we, had the initial concept to today. This whole idea started standing in the middle of a barley field. And so that really set the precedent for our direction of where we wanted to, where our focus came from. Again, I came from Shell's Brewery, and we'd set the goal that we would grow 15% of all of our barley within 15 miles of the brewery. And Nate's family's been farming for as long as the brewery's been here. And we were high school friends and reached out to him about, growing some barley for us. And that first year was where this idea really started from. We were drinking beers, watching the sunset, and talking about what else we can do with barley. And, we could make whiskey out of it. And that spun into us doing this very long trip through Tennessee, Kentucky, visiting as many distilleries as we can. And it's an industry that's very steeped in tradition that I respect the utmost respect, especially coming from a Shellsbury, which is the second oldest family-owned brewery in the country.
Yeah.
But it also, you see an opportunity from a new startup in that you can do things differently and challenge some of the established ideas, and that's where we really came about, like our how do I want to say it, like our concept. We really wanted to come at it from an agricultural standpoint, in that we were going to focus solely on ingredients that we could grow and source from basically Minnesota. We're calling it the Northland because we get a little bit of malt from Wisconsin, but essentially the state of Minnesota. And Minnesota's unique in that everything we need to make whiskey grows in Minnesota and grows exceptionally well. So we don't really have to go anywhere. And then the big difference is that barrels, we can get oak and barrels grown from the state of Minnesota, and that really sets us apart. And that's important because of, we are entering an industry that is heavily focused in, Kentucky, Tennessee, and steeped in tradition. And you have to really set yourself apart and like have something that's going to make it unique. And so we, by focusing only on ingredients that we can get here locally, and growing the majority of them ourselves, we can really, have to play off upon like a North Star that we can, just, this is our direction, this is what we're going to go in, and this is what's going to make us unique. And so I think that's hopefully, in the broader picture, coming from a non-traditional market of Minnesota, which is not the first state you think of when you think of whiskey, it gives us, a talking point and a functional, like, we are actually doing something that is unique and something that is different, with different ingredients, and using every step of our production process to highlight those ingredients and make a product that is going to be unique and stand out in the market.
Yeah. One thing I want to make sure we bring up too, because I don't think you brought it up yet, was when you showed us the yeast that was kind of part of your pandemic project.
So this building we're in, where the distillery is, this used to be the New Ulm Wholesale Building. It was built in 1912, and when we were looking to start this distillery, New Ulm is really unique in that right behind me, depending if you can see it in the camera, is the New Ulm power plant, and a lot of the businesses in downtown New Ulm are all on city steam, and that is a very valuable resource, one that is used extensively in distilling, and so we wanted to be in a building that was on city steam. And so when we were looking, so we don't have a boiler ourselves. We just get there's a pipe that comes in the basement with 145 PSI superheated steam, which is an incredible utility to just turn a valve and there it is. Not have to deal with boiler maintenance and all that kind of stuff. So we moved into this building. New Ulm Wholesale got bought out by Hermel. They're out of Mankato, and they have another building across the street that they were just kind of downsizing. It's their New Ulm location. So this building was absolutely perfect. It was what we wanted. We moved in August of 2019, and the world stops turning in a couple months. So, this is making this a long story.
Yeah.
So in that, we were underway. Like we were fundraising. We had our business plan was established. We were taking out loans, and then everything just stops. And so I had a ton of time in my hands to one, to kind of fine tune our business plan, but then two, I was just playing with things because I had nothing else to do. And I got really deep into this turn of the century rum literature, from Jamaican rum scientists and then Puerto Rican rum scientists, that they were looking at rum production methods, and then also isolating yeast strains and pure culture fermentations. And there's a ton of work that was done on this specific type of strain called Schizosaccharomyces pombe, which is a fission yeast instead of a budding yeast. And I just got obsessed with it and tracked down these strains from around the world, was doing tons of fermentations with it. And the unique characteristics that this strain can do really played into the greater picture of what we're trying to do here, of showcasing the base spirit itself, highlighting the grains that we're growing, wanting to go into the barrels at lower barrel entry proof because that has more water soluble extractive capabilities, which Minnesota grown oak in particular is very high in vanillin, so it's a vanilla flavor compound. And by going in at a lower proof, you need to distill at a lower proof, and you can distill at a lower proof with this particular yeast strain because it produces very little fusel alcohols, lower, like basically no heads whatsoever. So we come off the still at a very, we have filled some barrels at distillation strength, where we will distill at 110 and you just go straight into the barrel at 110. And that's not normal, we'll say, with typical yeast. So again, that's another one of, I think, many things that I hope all add up to be big differences in the long term, to really help separate us, make our product unique.
And you said that this is something that no one else is currently doing, working with that strain of yeast.
Yeah, as far as I know, this was like now, like even just talking about it sounds really crazy because I was like, just reading, these random scientific articles. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm gonna do this. Okay,
that is, I love that. That's like my favorite thing when people like go that hard on the things they like. I love it.
Yeah. And to be completely honest, I hadn't even gotten it to work consistently by the time we had opened. I was doing very small batch fermentations, and they were like up and down and. When it was right, it was magical, but it was like trying to hit that one spot, that target took a lot of figuring out. And then when you scale it up from 5 gallons to 2,000 gallons, that's another, massive change. And, I went from plastic buckets to wooden fermenters, and, it's just like, it was a lot.
Is this going to have, sorry.
Even on the simple process going from like small to big scale, it looks like you take a milliliter of the yeast, and you grow it to be enough to fill a
gallon.
So I mean, what we ended up on is a much more labor intensive process, in that we're growing all of our yeast on our own. Where you can buy it from a yeast supplier. It'll come in a freeze dried brick of dried yeast. Cut the top off, dump it in the fermenter, and away you go. It starts fermenting in 30 minutes. We are starting 7 days earlier from a frozen 1 milliliter slant that I propagated and then froze. So I have a freezer full of all these yeast strains. And every day, pull one out, add it into 100 milliliters of media. And every 2 days from that point on, I'm bumping it. So start at 1 mil to 100 mils to a liter, 10 liters, 10,000 liters into 2,000 gallons. The last step is 1 day versus 2. And then we switch. We go from like a growth media to malt extract, and I'm sorry for getting way too far into the weeds here.
No, I love it.
Now you're kind of acclimating the yeast to more like a beer medium, so it's kind of a transitional step, and it grows faster there. But yeah, with tracking down these strains that don't exist and not available commercially, well, if you're going to continue using them, you have to be your own yeast lab.
Yeah.
So we're just we banked them all, and we're growing them, and every 2 months I have to remake all these new 1 milliliter slants, and it's a ton of work, but hopefully I think it makes a difference.
Do you have a background in microbiology? Because it sounds like what you're talking about. This is like, that's really difficult stuff. How do you you don't just get into this?
Yeah, I grew up at Shell's Brewery. I mean, it was family business, and so I was the assistant brewmaster there. I studied brewing in Germany. I went to the Versuchs- und Lehranstalt für Brauerei in Berlin. My best German is not very good. But they had, in that course, you learn about yeast propagation, yeast growth, microbiology. It's a very condensed, it was a 6-month course, so it's, it's six days a week. I mean, it was intense, but I learned how to grow yeast there, and it was not something we did at Shell's. I mean, we order a 1 liter starter and we grow it from there. So we're not starting from scratch. So it was kind of that, you can never connect the dots moving forward. You can only like look back and connect the dots. It was like this thing I just kind of had the back. I'm like, oh, why not do that? I guess that's what we're going to do from now on.
Does Black Frost have any connection with Shell's other than just you've done both?
No. Like I said, I left in March of 21 to be here full time.
Awesome. And you were talking about this was a long story, but now I want to go way back because you said 9 years ago, and at that point, when you were first having the idea for this, distillation wasn't even an option in Minnesota. So were you like aware that there was a force of people pushing for this and thinking like, oh, I want to get in on this like pretty soon after it starts? Or were you just hoping, or were you part of that?
I guess I don't know the exact year when distillation was legalized. It had to have been legal at the time, because if it was illegal, like, we wouldn't have even talked about it. But
I think it was though, right? It was illegal to distill. I remember you
think
telling me that you were like all excited about the fact that in the next little while there was going to be whiskey here, and also frustrated that there were places just buying it and reselling it as their own because they couldn't.
I moved here in 2013, and that's 10 years ago, and I probably met Willis in 2015. So you must have been having the idea as the legislation was going through. So, I mean, it's been probably 5 years now, or maybe 6 years that distillation has been happening here.
I think so. Distillation has been legal. I think the cocktail rooms was probably the thing that changed, that became legal, and I'm not sure exactly when that happened, but if you think of like Tattersall has been open for, I want to say, quite a while.
Really?
And then like Panther Distilling, I believe was the first one. They've been around for
they're actually
a long time.
I remember really liking their they had a white whiskey that I liked right off the bat, and I was like, this is what it should be like. They're making young whiskey. Yeah. I think it was called like the St. Paul, or I don't remember what it was called, but I liked it. Hats off to those guys. They seem great.
Do you already have, like, I'm kind of curious just because earlier we were talking about how some distilleries are doing 2,000 barrels like a week, and that's how you don't think you'll be there till like 2 or 3 years. And then with all these processes, I guess I'm just kind of curious, like, what kind of price points you guys are going to be looking at, and how long you even foresee it being till like I can go to a store and buy myself some Black Frost.
Yeah. We'll do a 2-part question there.
Cool.
So the first part, and even kind of tying back to your previous conversation. So Minnesota laws are restrictive, we'll say. They're getting better, but when we were creating our whole business plan, at that time, you could produce up to 40,000 proof gallons. A proof gallon is 1 gallon at 50% alcohol. You could produce 40,000 proof gallons and still have a cocktail room. If you exceeded that, you would lose your cocktail room, and your tax burden went like through the roof. So we designed our whole production process around, we're going to make 39,999 gallons of spirit. And that law just changed this last session. So you can exceed 40,000 proof gallons and still have a cocktail room. But in the meantime, obviously, we've designed our whole production process and just start up a business based on that fact. But we also, coming from the brewing side of things and watching the growth of craft beer over the past 20 some years, 20, 30 years, you can learn from those mistakes and see the growth. The growth trajectory of craft spirits is where craft beer was 30 years ago, 20, 30 years ago. And so, having been involved in the Minnesota Brewers Guild and the Master Brewers Association, just watching this kind of unfold, we learned, you can learn from their mistakes and not do them here. So we designed our production system on being pretty efficient from it's myself and Sarah is doing all the production. And we oversized our equipment, automated it where it made sense, and that we can produce far, far more than 40,000 proof gallons quite easily, just even what we have right now. And if we added, a couple more fermenters, we're talking 150,000 proof gallons, easily to outgrow it. So we have the ability to grow much larger. And that was kind of the first thing you talked about, is even with us producing, 40,000 proof gallons is almost 700 barrels a year, which is what we're on track to do. the big guys in Kentucky, Tennessee are producing 1,000 barrels a day. So it's like it puts things in perspective.
As much as you could potentially produce in a whole year, they're easily doing per day.
Yeah.
So it's a huge scale challenge.
It was when we went down to see our still being the final commissioning of it in Louisville, Kentucky. At Vendome is the amazing still manufacturer, and we go see our still, which is not a small still. I mean, we are a
shoots up 3 floors and
it's a 30-foot tall column. It's 14 inches in diameter, and then we have a 75-gallon copper doubler on the side. From a craft distillery, we would fall in like the mid-sized range, and it has the ability to produce a lot of spirits. Next to our still being built is the new Buffalo Trace still that is 72 inches in diameter, and it was 2 60-foot sections of stainless steel. And I have a picture of the welder who was doing like the rectification. Like, he just looks like this little ant on this gigantic copper tube of. I mean, it was just like. Oh, okay.
And we can't get Buffalo Trace right now. Like, we haven't had it in stock at where I work in a while.
Yeah, so that
better finish up that still.
And
So
it was funny. The still just went online and they talked about it, like doubling their capacity or whatever. Wow. And I sent a picture to my business partner, like, remember this? We saw this, being built. And it looks like a fire hydrant is going off, like the spirit coming off of it. Like, you guys saw, it's like it's a trickle coming off our still, right? And then it runs for 6 hours, and all right, we're done. It is a fire hydrant, just like. And I was talking about the rum fermenters. So as you look to your right, when you walk in, you see 2 dedicated rum fermenters. We could add 3 more whiskey fermenters in the middle area, go to 7 days a week of production, and that would increase our capacity. But our pinch point for now is going to be where we store our barrels. Right now we produce anywhere from 15 to 20 barrels a week, and we put them upstairs, which is usually done with the aid of an elevator that, rest in peace, no longer is with us. So we're kind of making it work, trying to pump it upstairs and just make do with what we can. But we have on-site storage for not quite 1,200 barrels of whiskey, full-size 53 gallons. And then, starting kind of the end of next year, we'll have to either build a new rick house or find a new warehouse somewhere and continue to put barrels off-site. But we will always have about 1,200 barrels total stored just at the distillery. That'll be part of our tour. It will smell absolutely amazing in the summertime. So, it's a big part of what we're going to be. But yeah, it absolutely, as we continue to grow and, we're gonna need more storage.
Yeah. Oh. So what? Because we've kind of jumped. I feel like we've covered a bit of jumping around here as you're getting up to the point where the whiskey will be ready to serve. So what's that kind of like? What's the vision look like for what you'll be producing when that whiskey's like really ready to go? So in maybe year and a half now, like what will you be doing? Rum, whiskey, and gin? You don't know?
Yeah. So I mean, we have a little bit of gin that we're just gonna that we'll continue to make just to have in the cocktail room. I don't think it's ever going to be a product that we'll have through distribution.
Okay.
And that ties back to Minnesota law. You have to make everything that you sell in your cocktail room. And so even though a lot of the spirits like the brandies and the whiskeys that we have, we're buying the barrels and it goes through a production step where we proof it down and bottle it. So that is considered making it.
Okay.
But that's not something we're going to sell out in distribution. It's only right here for now.
But Sarah does make the gin, right?
Yes, yes. The gin Sarah made herself. We probably won't ever make brandy, so that's something we'll buy. We are sourcing our whiskey right now, but we make the gin and the vodka we've made. We'll have rum here soon that we've made ourselves, and then we'll be waiting until our whiskey comes.
Cool.
Yeah.
And I forgot where we're going.
No, I was just curious about what that final vision looks like.
Yeah. So again, going back to our biggest, our focus is whiskey, and one of the things that makes us unique is that we, how do I say this right? So with traditional bourbon, you make a mash bill, which is usually, by law, has to be at least 51% corn, some sort of flavoring grain, and then malt. So the flavoring grain could be rye or wheat, and then some malted barley. And then you make a mash bill, you mill it, cook it, ferment it, distill it, barrel age it, that's your bourbon. And that's your recipe. It ages for years, and you dump it, bottle it, there you go. That is a big gamble if you don't know what it's going to taste like. If you lay down barrels for 5 years and all of a sudden, like, well, whoops. So we kind of took a different approach in that it's like thinking of like creating different colors on a palette. And we're doing everything individually. So we'll take corn. We'll mash corn, ferment corn, distill corn, barrel age corn whiskey. We have barrels of that. We do single malt, like we did today. Mash, ferment, distill, barrel age. We do straight wheat whiskey, straight rye whiskey. All the grains are kind of done individually, and that allows us to highlight through mash schedules, through fermentation techniques, distillation, barrel aging, to get the best flavor of that particular grain. And so when we get to our bourbon, we have to blend those individual components at some point. And we're looking at, if we're doing a 2-year aged bourbon release, at year 1, we're going to start looking at those individual components, and we're probably going to do 9 barrel batches. All right, I need 6 barrels of corn, 2 or 3 of a flavoring grain, and then 1 of another one. And we'll identify
Is that how you
those.
get like a good blend?
So that's going to be kind of our thing, is that we're going to look at, we'll pick out the barrels that we like, dump them, rebarrel them. And so now we have an actual finished bourbon, rebarrel it. And then at 6 months, we'll start proofing it down inside the barrel. So we'll be dumping the barrels at bottling strength, or as close to bottling strength as possible. But what that allows us to do is then, say you want to have your own private barrel pick. You like a high wheat bourbon. All right. Come on down. Let's go through our rick house. Let's taste through some corn barrels, some wheat barrels. You pick the ones you like. We can dump them, and that can be your specific barrel.
Dang.
Like if you like a high rye bourbon or a high malt bourbon, we can be super flexible in that way. Is that
that's cool?
We have all the individual components, and you can make your own bourbon, or we'll have we'll have a certain amount too that's been dumped and rebarreled into a bourbon.
Yep.
You can pick single barrels from that blend as well. So
that's really cool.
It gives us a ton of flexibility.
Really cool.
And you could do that for like a bar, an individual,
bars, liquor stores,
a birthday
absolutely.
present. Like that's
you want to buy
really
250 bottles of bourbon?
Yeah. That's cool.
So it was, again, kind of looking at the traditional way of things and like how, what can we do differently that also makes sense from like a flexibility standpoint, and it gives us a ton of creative freedoms and abilities to really, fine tune some of the different fermentation profiles, and also like how we barrel age things, and it just highlights the individual grains themselves and really can, I think, give us a ton of flexibility, as we move forward, because consumer trends will change, and and it allows us to turn on a dime essentially if we want to.
Like you said too, it'd be kind of limiting to have all of one type that just didn't turn out quite like you expected or something.
Yeah.
So it's really
especially after 2 years minimum.
you're just hard working for 2 years.
When we first got here, I was thinking about that a lot. Like someone like Sarah, you're like hiring them, and then you're gonna find out 2 years from now if like everything's working out. It just seems so crazy to me as a like business model.
Yeah,
it's really cool.
I always get caught up thinking about how much whiskey is just in the ground.
Yeah.
Like how much is just sitting there aging.
Yeah.
There's just got to be.
Yeah, you like really got to believe in your product to get into this industry.
It's a weird way to forecast out, because you're also losing whiskey every year too. It evaporates. It's the angel shape. So, we put in 53 gallons and you get 48 out, or 45.
That was a question that I've had about rebarreling. So, for example, we have this really like odd product. We have a Maker's 40, not a Maker's, a Canadian Club 43 year, probably something no one ever asked for. But like they have to rebarrel that, right? They don't like just let that, because the more air in the barrel, the faster it evaporates, right? So they got to rebarrel that like every 5 years or something. I mean, this is
Yes.
speculative.
So like,
I feel like it'd have to be so much per ounce if they weren't.
yeah, I to get to that age profile, and like Canada too, it's cold, so your evaporation is going to be less. So they might not have to rebarrel it, but I know like definitely like in the Caribbean and like with rums and stuff, and even in like aged tequilas, they do every couple years dump them and rebarrel them just to minimize that headspace evaporation loss. So yeah, that's could be a thing. I don't know.
Sarah's back.
Well, we got
Sarah's
Sarah back in it.
Let's loud.
Maybe Sarah can tell us about the
gin?
process.
Yeah, tell us about the
I love
gin.
the
Tell us
gin.
about the gin.
My goodness.
As a gin connoisseur, I don't want to call myself a connoisseur. That sounds like a bad idea. But as someone
I've seen
who
you drink gin
drinks
out
gin,
of a LaCroix can before, like literally out of a can of LaCroix.
yeah, you just
That's
sip a
not
little.
a bad way to do it, especially if you're camping.
It doesn't feel very sommelier to me.
All right, I just like it.
I'm with Willis on this. That's a fine way to drink gin.
I mean, especially if you are in a place where you are not allowed to have glass. This
Like
is
my basement.
like your basement.
All right, how do we make gin? How's that been going here?
Those questions have two very different answers.
Okay.
Gin is made largely by infusing a neutral spirit with botanicals. And in order for it to be gin, it must have juniper berries. And some gins are made by infusing the juniper in the spirit in the still. So you can macerate the berries and put them into the still and then run that distillation process that way. Okay. We are doing it by taking our neutral spirit and then running that through a cloth bag that has all of the botanicals in it. And this current version 1 that we have is juniper berries, coriander, grapefruit, lemon, ginger, pink peppercorns. I do not know what you guys are doing over there.
We're hanging out.
I love it.
But
I
pink
love it.
peppercorns, continue. I love gin, so I'm captivated.
Yeah.
I think I'm forgetting something else. Angelica root. And while I do like this, and I wanted to make a gin for us that could stand up to a very strong flavored cocktail, for example, a Negroni or a gin old fashioned, if that's a way that you like to enjoy your gin. I also wanted it to have a lot of citrus in it and really be able to be showcased in a citrus heavy cocktail like a gimlet or say a gin sidecar where you're having a lot of intense flavors but there's not a lot of ingredients. So I wanted that, and I think it came out okay. I think maybe a little less ginger next time, a little more grapefruit, but everyone else seems to like it a lot, but we're all our own, hardest critics.
Yeah.
Are those botanicals? Are those regional too, or how many of these come from the area?
None.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
So it sounds like a really, like you mentioned, maybe you even as the creator taste some things that you maybe have ideas about how to do it differently next time. But I'm wondering kind of in the process, like if you each experience that with these things, like whether you have such a close eye on the process, you get a sip of
like I can't even
like
imagine
this, and you're like, yeah,
because I work on a song for like 2 weeks and I don't want to release it. I can't imagine like working on something for 2 years and then like putting it out in the world.
Yeah, and I think for Jason and I both, yes, I'm going to speak for you, friend, is that we really are always conceptualizing what we want the very finished product to be, and then how we move through that process to get to what we're conceptualizing, is gonna change, and we're gonna make adjustments. But I do think that if it doesn't come out exactly as the thing that you have in your mind, that I think we both are like, nope, well, it's over now. When it really isn't. And everything, it can be very good, but it may not be exactly what you had thought about in that same, in a process, in any process. If what you're conceptualizing isn't exactly that in the end, you might not be so happy, even if everyone else is like, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Like your note taking has to be unreal. You have to wait that long. I can't even imagine that, like having to wait that long. Like your note taking has to be on like really good.
There's a lot of
You ever
note-taking.
just discover a mislabeled barrel and like
this is delicious, but we have no idea how that was made.
a couple mystery
I saw you
barrels?
had numbers on every few feet. You had
they have
some kind of
numbers.
number
there's,
system.
there's numbers and color coding on them.
Yeah.
All right.
The notes that got to the liquid have gotten better, but I know like when we were first doing like the startup, my first day notes, I'm like, it was like a 14 or 15 hour day. I mean, it was like, it's just stupid. And like I got done, I'm like, I didn't write down anything, like, because I was just running around, like, mash in day one, like. That's what did we do? What happened? I don't know.
We mashed it.
What was Christmas morning like when all the so at a certain point you went from those 5-gallon pails that you were talking about to getting all of this equipment? Like what was
distillation is illegal.
What was
hypothetical conversation.
what was the break-in period like when you went from hypothetical to actually doing this legally in this building?
And that plays off exactly what Sarah was saying. Like you have this picture in your mind of like what this is. It's going to taste like this when it comes off the still. And until you turn on, because every piece of equipment here is new, either new or unique to this operation.
Yeah.
There's no way that you can actually tell what it's going to taste like. And so like you have a target in your mind and you hope you get somewhere close and that you like where you've ended up.
Yeah.
And so I think, I'll speak from the whiskey side of things and like even the rum side of things, and you can because you coming from FICRA and like having on a system for 9 years, like you had it dialed in. Like we were starting from scratch, and so like you're just okay. This is not saying like you have no idea where you're going, because you're doing all the process steps, and like even there is variations in how it affects the flavor. Like the steps you're doing are going to make a certain profile, but like ultimately, what comes off the still, like you didn't know until it actually comes off, and then you can keep continuously tweaking it. But there's a certain amount of like every piece of equipment is going to affect it in a way that you just don't know until it actually happens, and then you go from there. So like
absolutely, and I came from a distillery that had pot stills or combination stills, and they function very, very differently than a continuous column still with a doubler. And how I understood creating some of those flavor profiles that Jace was looking for was extremely foreign to me on this equipment. And so I also had ideas about what, a rye distillate was going to taste like, or how our all corn runs were going to come out. And it was very difficult for me at first. And also my note taking was terrible because I just was constantly running around and asking Jace what was going on and trying to learn a whole new system in a industry that's sort of the same.
Did you have as much like creative freedom too as at your last position? Like I imagine here you make a lot of the decisions of what's going in.
I did not have the same creative freedom or autonomy there as I do here. And that was both very reassuring in the 7-ish years that I was there, and also something that I wanted more of, because I was not the one making the final decision. I just had to make that final thing happen. It was like, there it is. Like, it's not my recipe. It's not, anything that I created.
You're
I'm
like
just making it happen.
the liability now.
And now I'm like, well, here we go. I'm like, Jace, how's this? Is this working out? He's like, it's delicious. I'm like, I don't know. Is it? But then he asked me, is this delicious? I'm like, yeah. Are you sure? Is it? so we're literally doing that back and forth to one another.
And I think that's where, I come from a brewing background, where she comes from a primarily distilling background. Like there was a lot of things just in the distillation process that I don't know or don't have the experience. I mean, I understand the concepts, but like, even yesterday we were talking about like the doubler liquid, like the turbidity inside of it changed, and you just like, well, what is this a issue we need to worry about? Like what? And you can just, like, well, this is what happened. Like, you can speak from experience, and I just don't have that experience, and so I think that's worked really well in that.
I think we are very
even though
complementary.
They're different stills, distillation and what's happening. So even though it's a different way of getting at the end.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, this is all very interesting. I've done like literally zero looking into all of this stuff, so this is really cool that to get to talk to you guys about this. And also, let's just take 1 second. I'm going to scroll through these angles to just say how freaking cool this room is.
You should come here. If you haven't been here, this is a place you should go.
Yeah, the drinks are good, the people are cool, and it's just like an awesome atmosphere. There's a little corner in the back you could totally cuddle with your significant other. A little cuddle corner.
They don't even ask what you do best.
Yeah, they don't even. And I really like the logo too.
Hold on.
They got an ice machine.
They got an ice machine that you don't want to plug any audio equipment in, but besides that, this place is awesome.
And I worked for Vicar Distillery, obviously, and it's right next to the lift bridge in Duluth, and there are many ships and trains and bridge noises, and I came here and I thought that I was going to miss all of that industrial sound terribly. And I have been comforted so much by the constant trains and shipping
and that
sounds,
steam whistle.
That steam whistle is awesome.
We love
and
it.
Firmenich and their sounds and the dairy butter factory, and it has been all very reassuring for me. So while not everyone loves all the train noises, I have to say I find it to be very relaxing when I sit here and have a beverage.
As a semi drives by.
It sounds like you got steam on tap, so you might just be able to install your own little steam whistle.
That'd be sick.
We definitely could.
We do have steam on tap.
So we were talking about the experience here, and for someone who might have only been to like brewery tap rooms or other types of tap rooms, like what's an expectation they should pull up with? Like what can you pitch about the experience of showing up here, trying some things, seeing the process? What's that like?
Yeah, and so I come from a brewing background, and so that was definitely, as we were designing this place and just thinking about what we want to do, I definitely had that was kind of like our starting point. So we have a cocktail menu, but it's ever evolving, ever changing. We created a seasonal menu. I don't have one laying around here, but as we're like looking around for it. So we just turned it over. We're in our spring menu. So we wanted to feature drinks that are kind of seasonally appropriate. And obviously as our drinks our spirits that we introduce, we'll continue to evolve both the cocktails and what we have available. So we kind of have a set of classics, some signature drinks, some that feature our own spirits, some that don't, and then a seasonal menu. And then as we're getting to spring, we went with kind of a heavier, light and refreshing menu there. As we get into summer months, we'll go with a lot, even more light and refreshing drinks, and it's always going to be evolving. So we didn't want to have this kind of set, stale menu. We always wanted to be constantly introducing new things there. When we introduce our rums, we're going to have a whole separate menu just based off of rum drinks. Mike, our head bartender, is really big into tiki, so we're going to have a lot of tiki cocktails and rum focused drinks in there. So it's a different experience in that in breweries you have a tap list and you're just picking the one, where in the spirit world, spirit is a part of a greater component of a drink. So it's there's a lot of different ways that you can showcase a base ingredient with the modifiers that you add to it. And so that's really definitely like where Sarah brings a ton of experience is, cocktails, the taste vocabulary that you have and like how you can get at certain places. And so that's what I'm really looking forward to is that she continues to make things that will end up in the menu. So it's going to be a ever evolving, constantly new menu here.
Yeah, well, and it sounds like you're making more than the base spirit as well. It sounds like you're making a lot of the mixes that go in with these cocktails and stuff. So like,
Didn't you say
I'm seeing
everything
them.
has to be made?
Everything has to be made on site.
Yeah. Okay.
That was-
so we got some bitters and some
There's cordial.
lime cordial. That was
And
what I was
there's-
looking for.
Limoncello-ish coming down the chute in the next month or so. There's raspberry liqueur that we produce here. There's an orange liqueur,
Coffee liqueur.
yeah, there's a coffee liqueur, and and some of those who all of the future is unknown, and what will go out into the world, into distro, and what we'll just keep here for ourselves.
For
It
anyone
seems
who
so
can't
fun.
see this list, it's pretty extensive. We got Sally's Raspberry Smash to the Blueberry Ramble and the
I can
Bee's
speak.
Knees
I can speak for the
Classic
bee's
and
knees.
the
That's what I had when I came here. That was
Peach
delicious.
Mule, Basil Orange Bourbon.
Maybe if we're smart, we'll cut
Mint
to
julep.
a menu right now.
It's beautiful. It might not be like this when you come.
It
It's
may
nice
not be.
right now.
All kinds of really interesting stuff here. So yeah, to your point about it being like a little bit different than just the beers that you brew or whatever, you've got like a lot of different ways to highlight the flavors of these spirits.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
and our staff is absolutely willing to meet you where you are. Maybe you don't have that much experience with gin or bourbon, or you maybe you really only like tequila, and that's not something we offer here. And our staff will help to meet you where you are and finding something that's going to hopefully make you quite happy.
Yeah.
I only drink tequila, and I like everything that I've had here today. So I can vouch for that. And it just seems so cool. It's like limiting that you have to make your own stuff, but that working within those limitations just makes it so much easier to be like creative and have to like find new ways to make things work. So I think that's really cool.
One of
Yeah.
my favorite sayings is creativity loves constraint.
Yeah,
And that is
yeah.
absolutely. Like,
Same
from
here.
where we started from, like, we're only going to make stuff from Minnesota ingredients. Is like, boom, put yourself in a box and figure out how to do things unique within that box. So
Well, what do you think? Do we have more stuff to poke around, or should we just say
When it gets a little bit warmer out, it's not going to take much more warmth
Like Monday.
outside before the patio, which seats about 40 people, is going to be nice and cozy and a little breezy, but still very fun to have a beverage outside.
And we talked about our neighbors across the street, Firmenich.
Yeah.
There are some really unique smells that come from that. Firmenich is a company that specializes in flavorings. Some days it smells like Tang. Some days it smells like dog food.
make Tang?
You know,
Do they
like,
make Tang here?
they literally
They-
they
Like
make
literally
Tang, like,
extranet drink.
yeah.
Yeah.
Whoa.
I mean, Sarah, you've
Yeah,
gotten
the-
experience 6 months of
Oh my gosh, the
smells.
generally very, very good vanilla frosting flavor,
Yes.
blueberry something. It will give you all
Watermelon
of the
candies.
yeah, like the reminiscence of a kid eating all the candies and eating all the sugar cereals, or what you did last week. No judgment, no wrong answer on that. All the flavors, all the smells come out of that place, and it's usually delicious.
Yeah, 95% of the time, it's amazing. Like smells are like, what is that? Like this is like, oh, it reminds me of this, and it's like it's always this cool conversation. And you're like,
Yeah.
woof, what is that?
Yeah,
smell?
yeah. The evocative language that comes out of the smells from the neighborhood are quite amazing, and I don't know, maybe you've played into this menu. I don't know.
Well, we have officially hit about an hour and 20 minutes. So I think it might be
a good long
a
episode.
great time for
Plugs.
if we could get some plugs.
Oh.
Where do we find y'all? What should we do if we want to learn more about Black Frost or y'all as individuals?
Yeah, our website is blackfrostdistilling.com. It is being updated, as we, introduce products and stuff like that. Sign up for our mailing list. We'll have updates that you can, stay abreast. Otherwise, follow us at Black Frost Distilling, Facebook, Instagram, no Twitter, but try and post semi-regularly, kind of some insights on what we're doing from a production standpoint. Just an article about Sarah Lee on women distilling that we just posted about, so you can check that and learn a little bit more about Sarah's history there. So
Cool.
Awesome.
All right. Well, yeah, thanks so much for having us. This was an absolutely amazing time.
Yes.
And yeah, well,
Hopefully we can drive home.
Yeah.
I have a breathalyzer if you need to use it.
Yeah.
Don't kill the recording. I want to clack from the back.
Okay. Clack from the back. That sounds interesting. It sounds like a Nelly song. But go right ahead. Awesome.
All right. Yeah. Thanks.